Good evening. All this will be yours if you worship me, Satan said to Jesus. And Jesus said to him in reply, "It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him alone you shall serve." Now we are in the holy season of Lent, and this first Sunday brings us to the desert. And the account of the Gospel of Luke that we hear during this cycle gives us the full details of the three temptations of Christ. It was actually the Spirit that led Jesus into the desert to be tempted by Satan. There is something about the desert that breaks you. Sometimes it's the heat, sometimes it's sand, the dryness, the animals, the wind, the solitude. There is nothing pleasant about it, and it eventually gets to you. I grew up in the desert. And Satan takes advantage of the most minimum form of displeasure, and immediately he attacks. During Lent, we take upon ourselves the disciplines of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. But these disciplines make no sense without God. None of these disciplines make sense without God. Because prayer without God is reflection, meditation, self-help, chicken soup for the soul. Fasting without God is a starvation diet, or an eating disorder, or the latest fad eating trend. Almsgiving without God becomes philanthropy, altruism, and ultimately humanitarian aid. But anyone can do those, even those who don't believe in God. We are people of faith, so we have no option. We cannot do our prayer, our fasting, and our almsgiving without God. The Lenten practices only make sense if we attach to them the living offering to God. And this, by the way, drives the devil insane when we attach God to the practices that we do. As we embrace the disciplines of Lent, let us be reminded that they only make sense with God on the horizon. The great thing about them is that prayer, fasting, and almsgiving are not just spiritual works, but they are corporeal, because you feel it in your body, you feel it in your gut. It's not just thoughts and prayers, but they are actually offering ourselves up as a living sacrifice to the Father. These actions that we get to do together as a church, indeed, is our way of worshiping God in body and soul. The devil wants us to worship him instead of God, and he thinks that loaf of bread and a little bit of a spectacle and power will deter us from worshiping God. The faithfulness of Jesus during temptation paves the way for us to recognize that in everything we do and in every season of our lives, God is always there. God is there. In the first reading, we hear about the constant presence of God with the Israelites at every moment of their history. God was always there, because without God, their desert made no sense. My father was a wandering Aramean who went down to Egypt with a small household. Through thick and thin, from prosperity through misery, from slavery to freedom, through desertic wilderness into a land of milk and honey, despite their unfaithfulness, constant unfaithfulness, God was always there by their side. The same we hear from St. Paul to the Romans. The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. The first Sunday of Lent reminds us that God is always by our side. And only when we make him the purpose of our journey, then the journey makes sense. Notice that St. Luke, the evangelist, tells us that when the devil had finished every temptation, he departed from Jesus for a time. The enemy is always restless. If the temptation goes away, trust me, it will come back. The enemy wants our fasting to be just a diet, our prayer just to be self-help reflection, and our almsgiving only philanthropy. But as Christians, we know that without God, the desert makes no sense. May we always keep God in perspective. He is the reason for our Lenten journey. And that in everything we do, we may worship God and Him alone. Amen.